You know, I really appreciated the opening treatment, Reverend Gregory, partly because of the topic that I'm doing, and I kept thinking about how it relates to much of what I'm going to say. I gave as a title for this topic that right is always right. Now, I knew that I was going to be talking about my most recent experience with teaching a Troward class. It affected me deeply through not just the 6 weeks we were doing, but even before that. It was just a profound experience. Now, my experience with Troward goes back, at least 20 years when I first took a course with Dr. Moira. And it was my first experience of Troward, and that was not my last. I took that very course, I actually don't know how many times. Maybe Ruthie knows, because she took almost as many as I did, maybe more. She probably took more. And occasionally, I even taught the class after I became qualified to do that. For Dr. Moira, she had to be away, or for Reverend June. So I felt like I knew a lot about Troward. And I had read this particular book back some years, but this is a new edition, and it is called The Creative Process in the Individual. And for some reason, and I'm sure it's mostly me and where I am from, coming from at that moment, it was just so much clearer to me than my previous experience. And I can't completely explain it, but I do believe, and since one of my class people are in the class, there was an excitement in the class as it became more and more clear to them how it affected their own life. So I've been thinking about it so much, and gosh, you know how when something is on your mind, just thinking about it, how you have all these things that come into your experience. Wait, that's like that. Oh, yes, that's an example of that. It happens to me, so I cannot be the only one. And this morning, I do a book reading before this class, and even what we're reading in quantum healing, I had to stop the class, the scheme, and we had to talk about how this happens in us individually. So going back to this book, this is a Troward book, and many people say that he's just difficult to read. Well, the editor of this particular edition, which is just sort of cleaned it up in terms of paragraphs and things. He didn't change any of Troward's words. But what he says is, Troward is not difficult, but he has to be discussed. How does he put that? He said it's not difficult, but it can be challenging. Okay, difficult, challenging. And he feels like that. And I do think that is more accurate than difficult, because I think we get challenged in what we read and how that applies to us. And the other thing is, the title is Creative Process in the Individual. That's not the name of the course. It was Consciousness and the Creative Process. But the individual part, he doesn't get to that till the middle, because he actually starts at the beginning. He starts with spirit. And it is a wonderful experience. He says spirit, contemplated, that's the second part. So it's self-contemplation of spirit. And Ernest Holmes says he invokes that concept. And then what happens is the essence is created. Troy calls it ether. And out of this ether, this essence, and that's where it's all over the universe, it's everywhere, it's that invisible thing that when we say in this teaching, anything that you can imagine has already been imagined and is ready. It's already in the mind of God, in that ether, in that essence. So when you do that, then matter comes in. That's what Ernest Holmes says. I mean, that's what Troward says. Ernest Holmes kind of cuts to the chase and says it evolves into creation. And so Troward takes a longer time to get there. But he does it very precisely. And the reason is, when you begin with the fact that spirit contemplated itself and produced all of us, then the teaching then is that we do exactly that when we want to produce things in our own life. There is this wonderful poem called The Creation by James Weldon Johnson, and it was written about the time that Troward was writing this. But he personifies everything, and we humans can relate to that in such a way, and he opens it by saying, "And God stepped out on space and said, 'I'm lonely. I'll make me a world.'" Isn't that wonderful? But that's exactly what Troward is describing. He is describing that for spirit to have an experience, there has to be a form in which to enjoy that experience. And he also talks about the process of evolution that comes, and Ernest Holmes doesn't dwell so much on that, but it comes down to the individual. And it's the individual, and that is what Ernest Holmes spends so much time talking about. But he keeps looping back to the details that Troward puts in to explain how it is that we actually do what we want to do. When I was thinking about the different essences of what we are, the elements of what we're talking about, I recognize as the next thing, there are certain things that are principles. And see, that, from that is what follows the title, What is Right is Always Right. Because the principle always works. Everything always works. But it's also a principle. The creative process is a principle. And it's, what's that word? Mechanical. It's mechanical, which means you may be putting processes in motion that you didn't mean to do or you've forgotten about, but it happens just the same. It's mechanical. And so one of the things that Troward says, and it's buried in here somewhere, he's establishing all of these facts, and this leads to this leads to this, and I'm going to say treat for what it is that you want, but it doesn't happen. Well, what's happened? Because this is automatic. And he says that somewhere there's an antagonistic force has been introduced into the process. Antagonistic. And then he goes on to talk about what that is. And briefly, what he's saying is that when you put your faith in something other than, and your words and your actions into something other than that wholeness that Reverend Gregory spoke of in his opening treatment, our wholeness, then you are antagonistic. Because wholeness is a principle. But however we derail ourselves is not. And if it's less than wholeness, unwholeness, if you will, then that's what the creative process does. It goes to something else. And so that aspect of it that we have to remember to contemplate that wholeness. Now, you've heard of Emmett Fox, perhaps, and you've heard of his wonderful little booklet called The Golden Key. And what is the main part of that? Take your mind off your problem and put your mind on God. Well, Emmett Fox got it. So if you've got a bad situation, you've got a disease, a diagnosis, if you've got everything, you can't keep focusing on that. Because if you do, what are you creating? The creative process is a principle. It's always right. And if that's what you're speaking, then this is how you get there. Now, I'm adding explanations that Troward does not, because his principle is just always right. He just says if an antagonistic force comes in, he goes in to say that the effects of spirit, that these elements of spirit, I think is a one way of putting it, are light, life, love, peace, power, beauty, and joy. And when anything in your life is antagonistic to that, then you are not coming from wholeness. You're not coming from spirit. You're coming from something else. I had so many experiences this week observing other people who were keeping their mind on their problem and could not stop talking about it. And in one case, I'm saying, you need to let that go. But you just don't understand how bad this is. You just don't understand what I'm going through. And when we're determined, because we're caught up in our own what? Story, and nursing our own grievance, what are we getting? The creative process doesn't care. You're just asking for one thing, so that's what you're going to get. Take your mind off your problem and put your mind on God. And so what is God in any instance? That hung me up for a while when I was thinking about that. What am I supposed to do? Say God, 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 God? Well, of course not. God has many names. In fact, even in the back of the notes for this course that we were offering, I think it offers close to 100 different names from God. And of course, wholeness and many, many names like that. But when we are seeking a spiritual principle that we ought to embody, put your mind on a principle, which is always true. And wholeness is a principle. Creation is a principle. Heaven is a principle. And whatever applies to your situation, you have to use that intellectual man that Trauer talks about. Use that discerning part of you to realize what is the God in this for you. If it's a disease, it might be wholeness. If it's any number of things, you can decide what it needs to be. But it's not on, I can't find a job, I don't have enough money, I'm dying, I have a diagnosis. So taking that idea and turning it into something you can use is what all of this is about. Ernest Holmes has that famous thing. We have it in the bookstore on the beautiful poster. There's a power for good in the universe, and we can use it. And the reason he says power for good is that for him and for all of us, that power, spirit, has been identified with good, the peace, power, beauty, joy, law, life, and love. That's the good. Those are the good things, and we focus on some aspect of that for our life. And if you're stuck somewhere and you know you need to take your mind off, where would you go? Where would you go right if you just needed to get out? And it's unique. Each of you may have a different answer. And see, that's the way it is. Because one of the things that Trauer is very clear about, and so is Ernest Holmes, but Trauer goes into great detail about this personal factor. Ernest Holmes doesn't use that term so much. He speaks of it more as the individual. But this uniqueness that we are is almost hard to imagine. That however each of you hears the words I say, whether you're on the airways, you're in here, is not exactly the same. Sometimes that boggles my mind. And one of the ways of explaining these kingdoms of consciousness that Trauer talked about was something that Michael Beckwith came up with. And it's taught because it embodies, in a human sense, those stages of consciousness, I think is the way it's referred to. And the first one is to me. And the examples of people that I was thinking of that happened this week, all this is happening to them. That's the way they're, and it's also called a victim mentality. I'm a victim of what's happening. You would not believe how bad this is. You do not believe what I've been going through. I remember that a long time ago, Dr. Richelieu was here up on this platform, and he said just that. I'm talking with this man. He says, you would not believe the troubles that I've been going through. And Dr. Frank says on the platform, and I don't want to hear. Because it's pointless. And he knows that, even though the man doesn't know that. The man wants to talk about it, though. He needs to tell that story. He needs you to understand how bad it is. He is in that victim consciousness to me. And then we move forward a little bit so that we begin to come out of that victim mode, and we come into through me. It moves through me. And so I'm not affected by everything. It's not as much has been going on, but things move through me. And then there's a third one that's called by me. I'm able to affect things. I'm able to bring things into being. I'm more in control of myself. And the fourth one is as me. I understand that I am God expressing all the time. Whatever I do and say, I'm expressing as spirit. Now, of course, some of us think, I don't think it was so much like spirit, about ourselves, maybe others. But the truth of the matter is, God is not affected by what we think of as negative behavior. We were talking about gratitude in the spiritual discussion last week, and gratitude, to me, is not an effect on necessarily your consciousness and the things that you have. You see, your good is always here for you. Always. If you don't have it, well, there may be other factors involved, but it's not because God has denied you a thing. Remember, it's out there in that ether. It's already been created. It's just a matter of your finding ways to accept it. And gratitude is one of those things that simply oils the wheel, giving and receiving, giving and receiving. But Eric Butterworth very clearly said, in one of the books that we have studied, he says, God is not interested in your gratitude, doesn't care. The gratitude you express is for you. You're the one who benefits from feeling grateful, because that feeling of gratitude moves you through other things. So this whole consciousness process starts with spirit. Spirit, which works its way, has created the process by which things come into form, so that I'll make me a world is here for us and here for spirit. And so when we have that, ultimately it comes down to the intellectual man who is capable of thinking for himself, is capable of coming into his own, and will produce exactly what it is that he's creating. And if it's not what he thinks he's creating or wanted to create, there's an antagonistic force that is introduced into his consciousness that gets in the way of that. And there's no blame. There's none of that. In our book reading with the quantum healing, Deepak is telling the story of a young woman who had a diagnosis of something that turned out to be a complicated series of things that really just started with something very simple. But because it was misdiagnosed, mistreated, and a lot of things, she was having all kinds of symptoms. And she had come to own that disease. And so by the time it came to him, because they were parents, it was a young girl, it was a teenager, the parents were exasperated, and so they'd invested all of this in this mitral valve prolapse that she had that was causing all of her problems. And so Deepak Chopra talked to her long enough that he recognized that a lot of the things she had been diagnosed with, she didn't have. And he has to very gently tell the parents and the young woman, you know, this doesn't have to happen this way. Well, let me tell you, that was not well met, because they were invested emotionally. I mean, they didn't want their daughter to have this. The daughter certainly didn't want to it, but she had invested in my mitral valve prolapse. So eventually, Deepak gets around to saying, why don't you actually try, when you feel this pain that I know you feel sometime, just sit back and look at it and see what happens. He says 2 weeks goes by. He hears nothing. So he called the parents. And so what they reported is she's having almost no pain and all the other symptoms have gone. And it turns out, she said, when the pain comes, I close my eyes and I just see the pain and allow it to just dissipate. And eventually, she doesn't have it. But because she owned it for so long, it took a little while for all of it to go, because our belief system is strong. And she was invested in it, not because she wanted it, she thought it was good for her, but she's just invested in it. And the people that I saw that were fighting the fact that somebody wanted to give them some good, they were invested in their story. And all of us are sometimes. This is not me pointing this finger, as they say. There's a bunch pointing backwards. We all do this. One of the things we talked about in the class about the stages of consciousness is we recognize that every one of us have been victims at some point, even though we don't live there. But something happens suddenly, and that's what we feel like. We just feel that way. We can come out of it because we understand. But we are humans living in this relative world. We can know the truth and still get knocked back occasionally. But that doesn't mean we can't step forward. And I would imagine that many of you in this room have fantastic stories about how you have managed to step forward in your life. And you need to own those as well as any stories that you have, because you are the hero of your experience. That's not a Troward term. That is a term that can apply to all of us, though. We create our experience, and we're the star. We are the star of our own experience. And I can choose how I want to be in a day. I can set my intention about how I'm going to be. And when I do that, I'm much more likely to be that all the time than if I if it happens, it happens. Oh, I don't think I have time today because I'm in a rush. It is all important, just as exercise is important, just as taking classes is important to improve our way of being. Everything is important. But there's nothing more important to me than knowing who you really are in your heart and in your soul. And you are God expressing. You are revealing spirit in your own unique way every moment of your life. And owning that and remembering that is going to result in an amazing life for you. And it's a practice. That's not the principle. The creative process is the principle. But practicing it over and over is how you move through those stages of consciousness, move through all of those forms of consciousness, and live in the highest levels most of the time. And so they have flashed the light back there, so we are near our time. But I'd like to take just a moment before, well, go ahead, we'll do your part too, and then I was going to close. Come on up, that's fine. She was making her move, so I didn't want to interrupt. This is the time when we give and receive, when we give back to this center some portion of the gratitude that we feel for all of the good that has come our way. This is a financial way of making that commitment. There are many ways. The center devoutly appreciates everything that you give us from your time and your treasure, as well as all of the service and everything that you do. We're glad that you're here, and we also appreciate your gifts. So as we say our affirmation, and if you have a gift that you're giving today, if you hold it between your hands, let's say, divine love consecrates my gift. It goes forth to heal, to bless, and to prosper all those who give and all those who receive. I rejoice in the sharing of my good, and I release my gift with love. And so it is. I wanted to just take a moment and just take a few moments to think about what we've been talking about. And I invite you to just close your eyes briefly and get comfortable in your chair. Imagine that the chair's supporting you and you don't have to do anything. Maybe uncross your legs. But simply know, as you breathe in and breathe out, that spirit of life that is coming through you, and as you exhale, that spirit of life is affirmative, it's giving. And you exhale everything you don't need from your body, and allow yourself to exhale worries, concerns, fears. Just let them go. And as you let them go, you breathe in, you breathe out, at least 3 times, releasing what it is that you don't know, who might get in your way, who might bother you. Just let it go without naming them. So as we release things we don't need, and release and breathe in spirit, we become lighter and lighter. We come to that consciousness of as me, that I am expressing God. I'm in direct communication with that power and that spirit that is everywhere present, all around, and is within me, without me, is in my fingers and my hands. And I'm simply floating on this wave of spirit. And so as I'm in this space, I breathe in and accept all of the wonderful ideas that are coming from my own expression of God. That God within me, the things that I want to know, to be, to try to do, I allow myself to simply be in this space, receiving the gift of spirit. I contemplate the self of myself, and I know that from the ether, from the wonderful essence of spirit, there comes before me this idea that is uniquely for me. And I allow this to percolate. I allow this to move up into a greater idea as I customize it, individualize it, and make it my own. This is the wonder. This is the wonder of life. And as I love the life I am, I allow this life to be vibrant, to be productive, and to, yes, be in joy. It is my birthright. It is that entitlement that I have. And so settling into that contentment within my soul, I come to myself and I move back into the space of this chair, feeling the chair, knowing the chair is still supporting me. And I wiggle my toes move my shoulders. But I allow myself to continue knowing that idea that is mine. And I nurture it, and I care for it, and I allow it to express in my life in the perfect way. And I know that everything that comes from Spirit and is allowed to move through is absolutely already done in the mind of God, that creative process working. So I express gratitude for the process, for all of the goodness that's in my life. And I know that it's done. So I simply release everything and say, and so it is. Is there anyone who has a question or maybe even a comment about our experience? The wonderful Vincent is walking with the microphone, and I'm going to step back closer to this speaker so I can make sure that that speaker's on.
I had a diagnosis about last April, and I had a physical, and my prostate is now normal. It was 2.0. It went from 7 point something to 2.0, and so I'm cancer-free.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Anyone else? And you don't have to have a story. If there's a question. No questions. Well, then that's wonderful. I know that we've got plenty of time, but I wanted to make sure that everyone had the chance to express. So let's know that we go forth from this day and into the rest of this day with joy, with beauty, and all the life and love that we can embody. So can you say yes? Yes. And so it is. Okay, thank you. Sorry? Oh, did I ask for prayer requests? I did not. I just assumed somebody would ask me if they needed one, because I thought that was part of it. Questions, prayers, yes. There's one there in the back.
Hi.
Now, make sure the speaker's on, please, Vincent, so I can hear.
Yes, I would like to have a request for my friend Randy. She fell and broke her hip and is now in recovery and has some other issues. So if you could please pray for Randy for perfect health and perfect body. Thank you.
Did you say her name was Randy?
Yes.
Okay. So I speak these words of truth for Randy. And so I breathe in, knowing that the divine is always present in absolutely every circumstance, every place. And no matter where we are, it is reaching its arms around Randy and the difficulty she is going through, the thing called the diagnosis. So what I know for sure is that Randy is a whole and complete young woman. She has a pattern of wholeness in which she was created. And right now, that consciousness of hers seeks strongly to move back to that pattern of divine wholeness, the pattern that she was born with. And so Spirit and this idea of truth is supporting everything in that wholeness that is Randy's. And in that idea, she relaxes. She opens her consciousness to all of the messages of Spirit. And she opens her mind and heart to the divinity that is right there with her, around her, and through her. She is ready for this idea of moving through whatever difficulty she names into that wholeness, that divine pattern of wholeness that is her birthright. I am grateful to know that wherever Randy is, these words are moving through all of the essence and the ether and surrounding her in love and compassion and yes, in wholeness. And she is whole, she's perfect and completely in the mind of God. And so with gratitude for all of the blessings of Spirit, and they are many, I release this word knowing that it is absolutely done. I allow that to be, and so it is.
Well, I want to thank you for your lesson, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. I want to get that book. I haven't spent enough time with Robert, and I want to do that. And as you were talking, I was using everything that you said to apply to my concerns of the moment. And I didn't speak up right away because I feel like I'm in process. I'm working on it all. But your prayer was so perfect. Also, I used that prayer for the concern that I have at the moment. And that is for my friend Carl in Idaho, who is in rehab right now, but they are saying that there's nothing more they can rehab about him. And he's it just sounds like a torturous existence, really. His wife is there 12 hours a day trying to take care of him in the rehab place. And my daughter and I are trying to help her at a distance, as every now and then she will say, I just don't know what to do. And I think our input is helpful. I was going to leave for Idaho today, but that plan was canceled because now there's COVID in the rehab place, and it doesn't seem like a very good idea to go. So I'm trusting that Spirit is providing everything that we need in this moment and knowing the right action to take. But I would love to have a prayer for Becky, his wife. I just can't imagine what she's going through, and I want to help her. And I think that through prayer is the best way to help her at this point. The greatest excitement I've ever heard from Becky really was when I told her I would come, and she was actually excited, and we were going to have fun. We'll have a good time. And she's so beautifully stoic about it all. Well, of course you can't come, and that's fine. And I'm going to try to bring Carl home, and I will, I can do all this myself. And oh my God. So I just want prayers for Becky, knowing that she is being taken care of, she's being guided to do the right thing, and that we all know that.
Well, one of the things that we know is however much compassion we have for someone, we cannot move them through the healing process. So what we are knowing from a higher level is that for Becky, for Michael, and for Anne, that this process, this drama, this unfolding that is happening in real time and happening all in the mind of God. All of this moves through in the way, the order in which, the divine order in which it wants to happen. And those of us involved in the order and the process may not always see exactly our particular place in that, but that doesn't mean that the divine isn't in charge of that process, because that's always true. Right is always right, and everything unfolds just as it will. And the individuals involved are, as much as they're interconnected, they all are individual and unique expressions of the divine and charting their own courses. And so, as we know for each of them, a peace, a calm, an understanding that allows new ideas to move in. And the idea of fatigue and the uncertainty and the lack of understanding of the whole process just simply lifts away and is replaced simply with love. Any fears and anxieties simply want love in all forms. Love as compassion, love as kindness, but it's love. And love is a principle. It is always right. It is the right thing. It is the right way to be. And that leads to a wholeness in spirit and understanding. And how all this unfolds in the detail is not up to any of us. It is simply part of the process that we are in, knowing that the resolution of whatever is going on is happening in divine order, and that love is achieved, and wholeness is the place. So in gratitude for knowing that goodness always prevails, when I, as the individual, get myself out of the way and allow it to unfold. So I just say yes in gratitude, and so it is. Sorry.
Hi, Reverend Katherine.
I'm trying not to cough into this. That seems like a crime. Okay, please.
Do you want us to go get you some water?
I can't
Okay.
hear.
Separately,
The speaker has to be on. For me.
She asked if you want some water.
Sorry?
She asked if you want some water.
Oh, I think I'm going to be okay.
separately, when you first started, you provided an image of that creative God wanting relationship. You have already touched on it in different ways, but I feel prompted to ask you, can you address that continuing relationship through the process of the individual journeys that we all take, including facing the types of challenges that people have asked prayer for, please?
Well, I think it comes back to when I was talking about those stages of consciousness. First of all, the most important thing, especially when you are faced with something, is to remember that I am always God expressing, and that God is never disappointed in me. God is never upset with anything I say and do. There is no, as Eric Butterworth says, God doesn't care if you're grateful. You are processing for yourself, for your own soul, and that relationship with the divine, that we call it as being within. But it really is in every cell in your body. It's all around you. You are that form that God expresses itself as. I'm lonely, I'll make me a world, and I am that world in this human form, and so is everyone else. So understanding that fundamentally is really how to answer that question. Yes, we go through situations. And what I do is in those prayers in the morning, I set myself up that no matter what happens, that if I feel myself or I recognize that I am going off that track, in other words, putting a block in that good that is flowing through me, that I said, Spirit, wake me up. Remind me what I am and move through me in words and spirit that allow me to express this disagreement, this dislike, this thing that's come up that seems to disturb my peace. I want to say the best thing with kindness, with compassion, with understanding, with all of the gifts that can move through me, and I allow Spirit to do that. I don't decide that. I let Spirit be my voice or my actions, depending on the difficulty, or my mind as I'm trying to grapple with something within my own thinking that I don't say out loud. It's got to be love-based and Spirit encompassing. Is there something else that you would follow up with? Okay. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate that. Because actually that's where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? It's how we translate all of these abstract maybe or absolute concepts into me living my life every day. Anything else from anyone? You all have been a terrific audience, and I do appreciate everything. Thank you so much.